20 drones rise from a tree line just after dawn, engines a thin line against the cold air, and ahead of them, strung out along a shattered country road, nearly 50 vehicles crawl forward in loose formation. Armored personnel carriers, fuel trucks, a munitions truck buried somewhere in the middle of the column, BMPs flanking the sides like nervous dogs herding a larger animal. The operators watching through their screens, kilometers back in a reinforced bunker dug into a hillside, know two things before the first drone even crosses the tree line. The column is moving faster than expected, and somewhere behind them, Russian artillery spotters have already begun triangulating the radio chatter bleeding out of their own position. The attack has not yet reached its target, and already it is being hunted. There is a quiet, almost bureaucratic tension to the first few minutes. 20 airframes, split roughly in half, 9 flying on standard radio links, 11 trailing thin filaments of glass behind them, spooling out from reels no larger than fishing tackle, cables unwinding kilometer after kilometer across the frozen ground below. It is an unglamorous technology, fiber optic guidance, more evocative of a landline telephone than of modern warfare, and that is precisely the point. A cable cannot be jammed. It cannot be spoofed, deceived, or drowned in noise. It simply carries a signal uninterrupted from a joystick in a bunker to a set of rotors 2,000 meters away. Immune to everything the electronic battlefield can throw at it, the radio drones carry no such immunity. They are faster to deploy, lighter, cheaper to build, and vulnerable to every jammer within range. The column itself does not yet know it is being hunted, or rather it knows in the abstract. Every convoy moving through this stretch of contested ground assumes drones are somewhere in the sky, but the specific threat, the 20 airframes closing the distance at low altitude, has not yet registered on their sensors. That will change in minutes. For now, the vehicles roll on, engines growling, dust kicking up behind tracks and wheels, soldiers riding atop armor with rifles slung, watching a horizon that still looks empty. Behind the drones, the artillery has found its mark, or close enough to it. The first shells begin to fall not on the column, but on the wooded ridge where the operators are believed to be working, walking a rough grid across probable positions, adjusting fire based on radio triangulation. That is good, but not perfect. The bunker was built for exactly this contingency. Reinforced overhead cover, blast doors, a secondary position prepared and stocked days in advance. The entire setup designed around the assumption that the moment they compromise a target, the target will try to kill them first. Still, hearing the concussion of incoming rounds thudding into the earth above your head has a way of concentrating the mind regardless of how well the position was engineered. The operators do not panic. They have run this before, but their hands tighten on the controls, and their eyes flick involuntarily toward the reinforced ceiling with each impact, even as their fingers keep working the sticks, keeping the formation moving forward. The first real resistance comes not from the guns, but from the air itself, invisible, humming, omnipresent. A Borisogled's 2 electronic warfare complex, parked somewhere within the defensive perimeter of the column, begins sweeping the spectrum, hunting for the telltale signatures of drone control links. It finds them quickly, and 9 radio-guided FPVs, broadcasting their command signals on frequencies the system has been tuned to recognize, begin to waver. One by one, their video feeds dissolve into static, the picture breaking into blocks of gray noise before going dark entirely. The operators watching those particular feeds swear under their breath, flip switches, try alternate frequencies, watch the telemetry spike and die. Within 90 seconds, all 9 radio drones are gone, not destroyed, not shot down, simply lost, tumbling somewhere into fields they will never be recovered from, their batteries slowly draining as they spiral toward the earth with no one at the controls. It should feel like a rout. Nearly half the strike force erased without a single shot fired against them, purely through the invisible application of radio noise. And for a moment, in the bunker, there is the sick lurch of watching a plan come apart. But the 11 remaining drones do not waver. Their operators watch their screens with a different kind of tension now, not the frantic scrambling of lost signal, but the steady, grinding focus of pilots whose picture never breaks, whose control never lags, who can see with total clarity that the enemy's jamming, however powerful, is reaching for something it cannot touch. 11 thin threads of glass fiber, nearly invisible against the frozen ground, continue to unspool behind 11 drones that fly on exactly as commanded, banking, climbing, dropping in altitude, entirely unbothered by a system built to fight a war fought on radio waves. It is here that the operation's deeper logic begins to reveal itself, though nobody in the bunker or the column yet understands the full shape of what is happening. The Borisovsk 2 was never designed with total silence in mind. Its jamming does not surgically remove only the frequencies used by attacking drones. It floods the spectrum, broadly, aggressively, because broad and aggressive is what defeats radio-guided threats fastest. But broad and aggressive also means the column's own communications begin to degrade. The BMP crew, trying to radio a warning to the Pantsir system about incoming low-altitude threats, finds their transmission chopped into static, has to repeat themselves, has to switch channels, loses precious seconds relaying information that should have taken none at all. The convoy commander, trying to order vehicles to disperse and take up defensive intervals, finds his own voice garbled on the return channel, has to shout the order twice, has to trust that at least some vehicles caught enough of it to comply. The very tool meant to blind the attackers is quietly deafening the defenders. And nobody has yet realized it, because in the chaos of incoming fire and swarming drones, degraded radio traffic simply feels like the normal friction of combat rather than a self-inflicted wound. The Pantsir system, a combined gun and missile air defense platform riding somewhere near the center of the column, begins to engage as the 11 surviving drones close the final distance. It is a genuinely formidable weapon, capable of tracking and destroying small, fast-moving aerial targets with radar-guided precision, and it proves this almost immediately. The first 2 drones to commit to a direct, high, straight approach are picked off within seconds. Streaks of tracer fire finding them cleanly, sending them spiraling down in trails of smoke that the remaining pilots see reflected in their own peripheral camera feeds. A grim reminder of what a clean shot from that system can do, but the remaining 9 drones are not flying straight. They have been trained, or rather, their pilots have been trained to treat altitude and heading as tools of deception rather than fixed parameters. They weave, they drop low enough to skim the tops of the scrub brush lining the road. They climb briefly only to dive again. They scatter their approach vectors so that the Pantsir's targeting solution, built to track a single coherent threat vector, has to constantly recalculate against multiple divergent paths. The system does what any well-engineered defense does under these conditions. It prioritizes. It reaches for the clearest picture, the drone flying highest and straightest, the one easiest to lock and easiest to kill, because a partial solution executed quickly beats a perfect solution executed too late. This is not a flaw in the system's design, so much as an unavoidable consequence of finite tracking channels and finite reaction time. But it means that while the Pantsir's operators fixate on the 2 or 3 most visible threats, methodically working through them, the drones hugging the terrain, ducking behind vehicle silhouettes, using the column's own bulk as partial cover, continue to close distance largely unmolested. The very act of the defense reacting, swinging the radar, adjusting the gun, committing to engagement, carves out blind spots elsewhere in the coverage. Gaps that last only seconds, but that seconds are, at this range, more than enough. Down in the column itself, something else is beginning to happen. Something that has nothing to do with jamming or radar locks, and everything to do with the raw psychology of men and machines under fire. The first drone that gets through, one of the low, terrain-hugging fiber optic FPVs that the Pantsir never quite manages to fix a shot on, detonates against the rear quarter of a fuel truck near the tail of the column. The blast is not enormous, not by the standards of artillery, but it is loud, close, and utterly unambiguous in what it communicates. The defense has failed to stop everything, and the column is now a target with confirmed hits landing on it. Vehicles at the rear brake hard, some out of instinct, some because drivers are trying to create distance from a burning truck. Vehicles further up, seeing brake lights flare in their mirrors, and hearing radio chatter that is still garbled by the ongoing jamming, do the opposite and accelerate, trying to clear the kill zone before whatever hit the rear reaches them. Within 30 seconds, a formation that had maintained careful spacing and disciplined intervals begins to stretch, bunch and fracture, some vehicles slowing to a crawl, while others surge forward into gaps that did not exist moments earlier. This is the moment the drone operators, watching from their bunker with feeds now showing chaos rather than order, understand they are no longer attacking a coordinated military formation. They are attacking a crowd. A column of 50 vehicles, moving in disciplined order, presents a defense with mutually supporting fields of fire, overlapping sensor coverage, the ability to concentrate return fire on any single threat. A column that has broken into isolated clusters. 3 vehicles here, sped ahead, and now alone. A dozen vehicles there, jammed nose to tail behind a stalled truck. A scattering of stragglers at the rear, exposed and undefended, presents something else entirely. Each cluster becomes its own problem, its own target, unable to draw on the collective strength of the formation it was part of only a minute earlier. The Pantsir, still committed to tracking the drones it considers highest priority, cannot simultaneously provide dense coverage over a column that is now spread across nearly a kilometer of road instead of the tight 200 meters it occupied at the start of the engagement. But the attackers are running out of time in ways the defenders are not yet aware of. In the bunker, warning lights are beginning to flicker on control panels, battery indicators, dropping into their final reserve percentages on drones that have now been airborne for the better part of 8 minutes. Well past the comfortable operating window these small quadcopters were built for. The fiber optic spools, too, are approaching their physical limits. Each reel carries only so much cable, and pilots flying the furthest, most aggressive approaches are watching the remaining line tick down toward the meters, where the cable will simply run out, severing control entirely regardless of what the battery gauge says. Operators begin making rapid, almost reflexive triage decisions, abandon the drone still circling for a better angle on a lightly damaged BMP, and instead commit immediately to the nearest viable target, because a strike delivered now against something valuable is worth more than a theoretically better strike that never happens. Because the drone died first, tumbling out of the sky with a dead battery and an empty spool. The smoke from the burning fuel truck begins to drift across the road, thickening the already dusty air, kicked up by panicked vehicles trying to maneuver around each other, and this new obscurant cuts both ways. It makes it harder for the Pantsir's optical tracking systems to maintain a clean visual lock on the low-flying survivors. Drones now ghosting through haze that breaks up their silhouettes and confuses target discrimination. But it also makes it harder for the remaining drone pilots to identify worthwhile targets among the chaos below. Engine compartments, exposed fuel cells, ammunition racks, all the vulnerable points a trained pilot looks for in the final seconds of an attack run, now half obscured by smoke and dust, and the simple visual confusion of a formation no longer holding any recognizable shape. What had been minutes earlier, a clean tactical picture, 50 vehicles in orderly rows, easily identified and cataloged, has become a smear of motion, smoke, and scattered metal that both sides are now struggling to read clearly. It comes down, in the end, to seconds rather than minutes, to a handful of pilots making split-second decisions with dying batteries and dwindling cable, hunting through drifting smoke for the 2 targets that matter most in any mechanized formation: fuel and ammunition. One drone, flown by an operator who has already lost his primary target to the smoke and is now working purely on the last visual reference he had before the haze swallowed it, threads a path between 2 panicking BMPs and finds the ammunition truck exactly where it was supposed to be, still crawling forward in the confusion because its driver, boxed in by vehicles ahead and behind, has nowhere to go. The impact is immediate and catastrophic in a way the earlier fuel truck strike was not. Secondary detonations, rippling outward as stored munitions cook off in rapid succession. A chain reaction that sends a column of black smoke rising high enough to be visible for kilometers. And that turns what had already been a fracturing formation into an outright scene of disorder. Vehicles now actively trying to reverse away from an explosion still throwing debris across the road. A second drone, one of the last still airborne, finds the fuel truck that had only been damaged in the earlier strike and finishes what that first hit started. Its remaining fuel cells rupturing in a fireball that adds its own column of smoke to the one already rising from the ammunition truck. Between the two burning vehicles, sitting roughly in the middle of what used to be an orderly line of march, the road itself is now effectively impassable. Wreckage, fire, and the wide berth every remaining vehicle instinctively gives to burning fuel and unexploded ordnance combining to physically sever the column into two halves that can no longer reach each other along the planned route. By this point, every drone that launched at the start of the engagement is gone. Some fell to the Borisogolsk-2's jamming in the opening minute, tumbling silently into empty fields. Some were shot down cleanly by the Pantsir, streaking trails of smoke marking their final seconds. Others simply exhausted their batteries or ran out of cable in the final approach, dropping short of any target, their potential unrealized. Not a single airframe returns, not a single pilot gets to fly their drone home for reuse. Judged purely by the arithmetic of assets expended versus assets recovered, it looks on paper like an even trade at best. 20 drones lost in exchange for a handful of confirmed hits. But the column left behind tells a different story than the ledger of drones expended. Nearly 50 vehicles that began the morning as a single disciplined formation, capable of moving as one coordinated unit with overlapping defensive coverage and a clear route forward, now sits scattered across more than a kilometer of road, split into isolated clusters by wreckage and fire, unable to reform into anything resembling their original order. The planned route forward is blocked by burning vehicles that will take hours to clear, assuming recovery vehicles can even be brought forward safely. Vehicles that survived entirely unscathed by the drone strikes now find themselves trapped regardless, boxed in by the wreckage of vehicles that were not so fortunate, their engines running uselessly as their crews wait for orders that may not come for some time. Given the state of the column's internal communications, what actually determined this outcome will be debated long after the smoke clears, and the honest answer is that no single factor did it alone. The fiber optic drone's immunity to jamming ensured that the attack could not simply be erased the way the radio guided. Half of the formation was erased in the opening minute. Without that resilience, the entire strike likely ends in those first 90 seconds, a story of Russian electronic warfare working exactly as designed. But resilience against jamming alone does not explain how 11 surviving drones inflicted damage, disproportionate to their numbers. That requires the second thread, the quiet, almost accidental way, the Borisogolsk-2's own broad spectrum. Jamming degraded the column's ability to coordinate its defense, turning a weapon meant purely to blind the attacker into something that also partially deafened the defender, delaying warnings, garbling orders, and buying the surviving drones precious extra seconds in every engagement window. And even that combination, resilient drones exploiting a defense partially blinded by its own countermeasure, might have produced only modest results against a column that held its formation and its discipline. It was the column's own fracture under pressure. The instinctive scattering of vehicles, the moment the first confirmed hits landed, that transformed a handful of successful strikes into a systemic collapse, converting what should have been a survivable engagement against a numerically inferior threat into a rout measured not in vehicles destroyed, but in an entire formation's ability to function as a coherent fighting force. 3 explanations then, none of them sufficient alone, all of them necessary together. Technology that refused to be jammed, a countermeasure whose success came bundled with an unintended cost, and a human response to sudden violence that turned order into chaos faster than any weapon on either side could have managed by itself. The drones are gone, all 20 of them, scattered across fields and roadside ditches, their batteries dead, their cables severed or fully spent. The column they attacked is still there, technically, most of its vehicles undamaged, most of its crews unharmed, and yet it is not the same column that set out that morning, and it will be hours, at best, before it moves as one formation again.